Brett Weingarth. I'm a Sydney Rock oyster farmer here on the far south coast, the Sapphire coast of New South Wales. I grow rock oysters straight out here, which is Merimbula Lake, and also in Pambula Lake. The oyster industry in New South Wales predominantly grows the Sydney Rock, and some of the estuaries along the coast also grow Pacific, and indeed the other native oyster that we've got, which is the Angazi. I came from a farming background, dryland farming background out of Cowra years ago, 10 years ago now, where I was growing sheep, wheat and cattle. And we moved down here and started oyster farming in 2006. The oyster industry is going through a fair bit of change at the moment. A lot of the traditional styles of farming are beginning to kind of be revolutionised. You may have noticed out here that you can see a lot of the structure popping out of the water. That's actually floating bag technology, which was developed in an estuary to the south of here about 15 years ago. We're finding that kind of structure, or that kind of infrastructure that we're using, is a lot more helpful for the husbandry of the oyster and is streamlining our processes somewhat. I also run, as part of the diversification in my business, I run a oyster tour business called Captain Sponge's Magical Oyster Tours on Pambula Lake, which I've been running for a couple of years now. We bought water in Pambula Lake as a diversification of our business and an expansion of our Sydney Rock growing enterprise. So yeah, we grow the oysters, and we typically sell oysters into Sydney. Increasingly we're kind of looking into the southern markets like Melbourne, Canberra. Some of us guys also sell into Canberra as well. There's not a huge amount of marketing that goes on with the Sydney Rock. We tend to send our oysters into, say, the Sydney market from the south here and invoice our wholesalers, and they pay us what we invoice on. The pricing structure is pretty stable, but I think there's an opportunity for us to probably increase our pricing as we actually increase our marketing and our exposure into the Australian population, if not into the export market as well. So I'm a part of Australia's Oyster Coast, which is a body of guys who got together, now a company. And those oyster farmers come from Nowra in the north, on the Shoalhaven, Cookhaven rivers up there, down to Wombourne in the south, which is as far south as we commercially grow the Sydney Rock oyster. That company is pushing oysters into export, so we've been dipping our toes in southern China and also into Hong Kong, a little bit into Singapore. And we're looking to grow that part of our business and hopefully pick up a premium on our pricing. But increasingly also we're finding opportunities at home as well. So domestically we're doing more and more product into areas where we haven't already been selling oysters. Okay, and we've got a environmental aspect to our business in the sense that we're actually kind of contracted to each other to look after our estuaries and our water quality. So we do a lot of work in the community, in schools and that kind of thing, to raise awareness of our environmental credentials, and hopefully we're going to ride on those environmental credentials into the future, domestically and into the export market. From a production point of view, we normally catch our oysters on slats down here. A lot of the older ways of growing the oysters are going the way of the dodo, thankfully. So we'll catch our oysters on slats, which are like a vinyl piece of kind of Venetian blind. The oysters come along and they catch in under that. We then strip those slats and get those little baby oysters off, and typically put them into cylinders which have got a 3mm mesh on them, which we call tumblers. Those tumblers are normally attached to something that'll allow them to rock around on the tide and in the waves, and that'll actually give the oyster a good shape. So we try to grow our oysters down this way to a uniform cupped shape, so that they're more appealing to the market. The way we used to grow oysters traditionally was on tarred sticks. We don't tend to do that anymore. The tarred stick was 6 foot long. inch by inch hardwood. We used to dip those in tar and then put them out in the river to catch oysters on, and they'd stay on those sticks 2 or 3 years. The oysters coming off those tarred sticks would typically have a lot of variation in their shape. The way that we're catching our oysters now, which we call single seed, because the oyster is single from the time it's on the slat to the time we've actually sold them into Sydney or wherever they're going. That single seed oyster typically is of a more uniform kind of shape than what we were getting off the sticks. From an environmental perspective, we have phased out the use of sticks, and particularly tar in the industry on the south coast here anyway, because obviously tar's petrochemical and we don't like to put those kind of things in our water from a water quality perspective. So after we've caught on the slats, we twist the slats to get the oysters off. They go into the tumblers shape them, as I was saying, and then from there those oysters will go into what we call floating bags, which is what you can see behind me over here. The floating bag will contain the oysters, okay, and it's always floating on top of the water, as the name would suggest. Alright, and that's kind of the feeding zone for the Sydney Rock oyster. Those oysters will be dried, okay, so you've got a bag on each side of the rope like this. Alright, one bag will be flipped over the top of the other, and those oysters will be dried out. The biofouling organisms that are trying to attach to those oysters and also attach to the bag will dry out in the sun and the wind, and then those oysters will be flipped back into the water after maybe 4 to 6 days, and the other oysters in the bag opposite will be flipped over and dried out as well. So it's kind of a maintenance thing that we do with our oysters to maintain the cleanliness of them, so we don't have to chip all that stuff off before they go to market. The floating bag is also good for keeping that good uniform shape, which is appealing in the market as well. So yeah, we're phasing out a lot of that old, or most of us, not all of us, are phasing out that older kind of tarred stick and tray infrastructure in favour of the floating bag.